Early in my career, I focused mostly on large Canadian-based, many of them internationally focused organizations. But in the last 8 to 10 years, I've been really focusing more and more on working with small to medium-sized businesses, simply because, well, I guess there's two reasons actually. One reason is that that sector, in spite of the fact that it drives 80 to 85% of most economies, is underserved from management consulting services. And secondly, it's just fun. It's great to be able to sit down with head of an organization, identify what root cause issues are, and work them through, and then see the results almost immediately. You don't get that kind of result in larger international or even Canadian-wide organizations. And if you get it, it takes a few years, and then it needs to be maintained over a longer period of time. So let's just jump into it. I will be talking about my book and some of the main concepts there. The first and the most important starting point is the unique and the critical role of the CEO. CEOs in organizations are a unique kind of an individual. They're the head of the organization. They have a lot of different titles. It might be entrepreneur, it might be founder, it might be owner. As organizations get larger, tends to become president or CEO. But at the end of the day, it's the person that's accountable for the organization. And I like to think of it in this way, just to have a couple of slides for you. If we think about an organization as a system, that organization works and operates within an environment. And within that environment, it gathers input from the environment, and it provides output into the environment. So what really is happening is that system is a flow through where it creates added value. So the challenge that the organization has is, how do we create more added value than our competitors or than other kinds of alternatives? Here's the interesting thing about that, though. If you think about how an organization operates, it's kind of like a black box. People in the community, clients, people outside of the organization don't really see inside that organization. They see what the output is. They're concerned with, what are the benefits? Are they ethical? Do they use appropriate suppliers or getting increasing attention? But at the end of the day, what are the benefits? What are the features? What are the prices? Is this a good organization for me to be dealing with? But the head of the organization is the one person that is accountable for what's going on inside that black box, and they need to be really aware of what's happening. And there's a few major driving systems, if you will, or processes that are inside the organization. The first one is the organizational strategy. Who are our customers? What are we making? How do we sell it? Where do we sell it? And so on. The second are the organizational systems. What are the layers, functions, business systems, business processes that we need to have in place to add that value inside our organization? And then the people. How do we get the right people into the right roles, doing the right things so that we can get the kind of output we need that's going to help us achieve our strategy, and to do that within the organizational systems that we've put in place? So if you look at that, it looks kind of complex, because it is complex. What we have to realize is that there's only one person in the organization. I put that person in the top left here, the owner or the CEO, that has the accountability and the authority, that sees the whole organization, and that is able to establish and manage and provide oversight over all of those different aspects within the organization. So early when I started, my first focus as a management consultant was in organization design. As I started Effective Managers, I began to really look into doing research, talking with people, thinking about how do we help organizations improve performance overall. And there's no question that you have to start with that head of the organization, because so much of what happens in organizations is driven by the head of the organization. So that's why the title of my first book was The Effective Point of Accountability. The Effective CEO, which is what we want to do. I jumped ahead there a little bit in the numbers of books that I'll be writing, but The Effective CEO. So thinking about strategy then, and the starting point of that, If we look inside the organization and take a little peek inside that black box, strategy development is one thing, but strategy execution is another thing. When the strategy is developed, you get this vision, you have the Pegasus, you see your vision for what you want the organization to be, but at the end of the strategy, this is the result. It's kind of like a horse, looks kind of happy, but it's not what you expected to achieve. So the bottom line is that this happens not because of any ill intent by employees inside the organization. It's not because people aren't working hard. My experience is that people inside organizations work very hard. The result is the result is not achieved simply because we were not able to focus in on the right work and to be able to do the right things at the right time. So there's been a lot of research around this, and according to Dr. Cotter, who published this article in Forbes on a mega-analysis of strategy implementation around the world, 70% of strategies fail to achieve their strategic goals. So what does get in the way of top performance? Most organizations, those that are operating anyway, are successful. So what gets in the way of them being able to achieve their strategy? What gets them in the way of being able to leverage their success to the maximum? I call it organizational churn. There's energy expended inside organizations that is not focused in the right direction. People are getting involved in so many things that they don't need to get involved in for a variety of reasons. They're trying to negotiate their way with co-workers instead of having a clear pathway. They're reading email they shouldn't have to read. They're going to meetings that they shouldn't have to attend. They're faced with people not making decisions that should be made so that they can get on with their work. All of these things add up over time to ineffectiveness. And this leads to symptoms inside the organization that cause ineffectiveness. I'm just listing them up here so that you can see them. But as you will see, there are a number of things that happen in organizations if we don't have the appropriate systems in place inside the organization. So the starting point then is how do we describe the organization so that the head of the organization, the CEO, is able to focus in on the right things? I'll just breeze through this here. One of the tools that we have is the mind map. So is your organization resilient? Are we focused in on the right things? And here you can see that you can come up with all different kinds of aspects of what's involved in the organization and identify what is what is necessary to have for a high-performing organization, or as you see on this slide, a resilient organization. But that's complex, and it's really hard to understand what's going on. And I started thinking about organic systems. And if you think about trees, for example, they're complex organisms. They provide a lot of good for humanity. They exist in some places where you'd think that a tree shouldn't exist, just like some organizations can thrive in very difficult circumstances. And there's sometimes when you would think that the tree would thrive and all of its neighbors do, it doesn't, and it doesn't survive, just like some organizations who have good systems in place, who have a good business model in place you think should be very successful, and they're not. So we did go ahead and develop a model based on a tree. And I just want to give you this, and this is the major change in the second edition of this book, is that we've added in this model at the beginning to show how this relates. Because if the head of the organization has this picture in their mind about how everything holds together in terms of a successful organization, then it helps a great deal in terms of setting up what the priorities would be and should be for the organization to move forward. So we've got three major sections, and they divide into nine parts inside the tree. So the first one is the business model. It's like the bedrock. So the bedrock forms the stability for the tree. The business model creates what is it that we're making and selling, and to whom do we make it and sell it at the most basic level. At the next level up, we talk about strategy, and strategy is like the topsoil. So the topsoil provides the nutrients. The strategy helps us determine how best to position ourselves in a competitive marketplace to ensure that we can be as successful as we can be. The next element is the organization design. So organization designs is like the root structure for the tree. It provides the stability for the organization, and it grabs those nutrients from the topsoil and brings them up to feed the tree. So the organization design also forms that really basic element in the organization, which enables you to organize yourselves to be able to implement your strategy with your business model. So those are the structural elements. We then come to the outputs of an organization. The first output that I have and that I refer to is culture. I talk about culture as an output. Many disagree with me, and that's okay. But I think of it as an output because you can make changes to it. Culture is really the result of the values in an organization and the actions taken to adhere to those values. So if there's a strong value set and people adhere to the values and are rewarded for that, if there are consequences for not working within the values of the organization, then over time those values will impact on the culture. So it's the totality of all of the decisions and actions taken in the organization on a day-to-day basis that result in the culture. So that's one of the outcomes. And in the tree model, that's like all of the branches and the twigs. It creates the shape of the tree. It can be pruned over time, and its shape can be changed, just like a culture can be changed over time. The next is performance. The performance of the organization is like the foliage. If it's bright green, you know things are well for a green tree that should have bright green, of course. For the organization, all of your reports are in the black, are doing well. All the indicators for your scorecards are green. It means that you're doing well as an organization. And then the third one is the profit. Profit is like the fruit of the tree. So the profit is what you take away. If it's a not-for-profit organization, being able to deliver the services that were anticipated is the outcome or the fruit for the organization. Now we have to talk about the trunk of the tree. The trunk of the tree is what which connects the nutrients, the roots of the tree to the outcomes, which is the foliage and the canopy of the tree. And there are three parts to the trunk of the tree. The first is the accountability and authority model. So how do we ensure that within our organization, people understand what it is to be accountable? Do we have a common language for accountability and authority inside the organization? The second one is managerial leadership. So how do we ensure that our managers have the ability and the capability to manage well? Managers are extremely important. And then the third one is managerial capability, or as I'm calling it now, fit to role. How do we ensure that we're getting the right people into the right roles so that every individual, whether they're managers or not, are doing the right things? And it's particularly important with managerial capability because this is how we ensure that managers are able to do the work that they need to do. So at the bottom, then we have the structural elements, which are the business model, the strategy, and the organization design. At the trunk of the tree represents the people functions inside the organization, accountability and authority, managerial leadership, managerial capability. We'll be talking about those three more shortly, so I'm just giving you a slight peek into them. And then the outcomes of the organization. How do we ensure that the outcomes are appropriate for the work that we need to do in our organization? So that's the setup. What I'd like to do now is just give you a quick overview of the 6 key functions of the organization. I'm seeing some questions are coming in. Thank you for yours, Jacques. Yes, we will try to get there, but if I don't get to it in the main text, just do come back to me. So the 6 key functions. The first one is manage, and if there's one takeaway, whether you're a consultant or the head of an organization yourself, the key gap that I see in most organizations that are not performing as well as they could is that the head of the organization is not managing. So they're leading and they're doing a great job of leading, and they figure, well, you know, I pay a lot of money to my executive team. They know what to do. They just have to get on and do it. And as you'll see as we go through the rest of the presentation today, this is an error because managing is critically important in the organization. So leadership and management are like two sides of the coin. Everyone who's accountable for a team anywhere in the organization needs to be able to lead their team. They need to motivate them. They have to instill confidence into them. They have to ensure that they're inspired and motivated and empowered. But on the other hand, they also have to manage them. They have to delegate clearly and so on. So if we think about leadership, we can think about leadership in terms of complexity of the work, and we can think about leadership in terms of size and or number of teams. So leadership exists throughout the organization, and the higher in the organization or the more complex the organization it is, the greater the degree of leadership traits. So I agree with those that say that leadership is at the top of the organization, but I would amend that and say that there's more, sort of a greater amount and a greater degree of leadership required higher in the organization and in some roles. But leadership needs to exist in all levels. And anyone that has the knowledge and the skills that can help the organization do better or help their team members do better, whether they're a manager or not, can show leadership and can help the organization to be more successful. So in this section, I want to make one key point to it, and that is that managerial leadership, starting, as I just said, at the top of the organization, is critical to ensure that we're having engaged employees. Managers are really they're kind of the link. I chose this image carefully because they are a link in the chain between strategy and execution. So from the head of the organization to the front line, if managers don't do their work, both in terms of delegating appropriately sized work down the organization and providing communications back up the organization, if that link is broken, then the organization by definition will not be as successful as it can be. Or as it should be. Well, should be and can be. So employee engagement is good. This I've drawn from the Gallup 2020 meta-analysis where they looked at engaged employees around the world. So millions of data points, tens of thousands of teams, and they did the measure of engagement of employees and compared that to organizational output. So it was a really major undertaking that they did. And then they looked at the top quartile of the organizations. So those organizations with the highest percentages of engaged employees, and compared that to the bottom quartile, the lowest percentage of engaged employees. And the results are, they're unquestionably solidly positive. So if you have more engaged employees in your organization, you will be more effective and you will be higher performing. So these are some of the numbers that they found. 66% higher well-being. So employees felt better about their job and their lives. 81% less absenteeism. They're much more likely to show up to work. 41% less quality. So they're more focused on doing the right work. 18% lower turnover, so they're less likely to quit and move on to other roles or other organizations. 10% higher customer loyalty, so the service profit chain in effect here, that if they're feeling more engaged, they're doing better job with customers are more satisfied, and they'll stick around longer. That hits the bottom line. 18% higher productivity, so the organizations are more productive, and 23% higher profitability. So it all goes to the bottom line. So any investment that you have in getting better engaged employees, which means more investment ensuring that your managers are doing their managerial leadership work, has amazing payoffs. So that doing the managerial work, starting with the head of the organization, is documented in our approach called the 5 requirements of effective managers. And we walk through this in the book at a high level to give you some insight about these 5 things that all managers should do, starting with the owner or the head of the organization. They need to plan. At the head of the organization, it's a strategy. All the other managers should have a 2 or 3 page plan. We call that the value added plan. They need to decide what it is that they need to focus on. Where's their value added work? What do they need to do? Number 3, they need to set context and boundaries for their subordinate team members. Number 4, they need to delegate clearly and crisply so that people understand. And then finally, they need to establish those feedback loops that are important throughout the organization. So we now move on to function number 2, which is delegating work down the organization. So we talked about accountability and authority as one element of the trunk of the tree. So this one is one part of the accountability and authority, which is delegating work down. So what's the main driver of performance? This we found through our own research at Effective Managers. The main driver of performance in organizations is accountability. So organizations that have higher levels of accountability have higher levels of manager effectiveness, and that leads to higher levels of organization performance. So that manager effectiveness relates directly to the Gallup scores that you saw in those earlier areas. So we don't get the kind of managerial leadership that we need in the organization if accountability and authority inside the organization are not clear. So why is it that accountability and authority in the organization aren't clear? This came to light in the research that we did in 2012, 2013 with the University of Ottawa. And we found through the analysis that accountability actually has 2 different dimensions, not 4, 2 different dimensions that are really, really critically important. So the first one is how strongly do I feel accountable for doing good work? And the score there is 8.88 out of 10. So this is 10 points on a Likert scale. And so employees, managers, these were done with managers. Managers feel accountable for doing good work. They want to be successful. They want their teams to be successful. They want their organization to be successful. The second dimension, however, is clarity of accountability. So how clearly do I understand that for which I will be held to account? And there's the big difference, 6.93 out of 10 on a Likert scale. So if I were doing a university paper, I might be happy with a C+. 6.93 is not so bad. But if I am accountable for my organization and I want to get the best I can out of my team members, is 6.93, that level of clarity, really appropriate? And of course, the answer is that it's not. And here's the good news about this slide. The good news is if it were reversed, we would have a very, very difficult time inside organizations, because the felt accountability is driven more by your inner value set. People wanting to do well has to do with their values and the way they want to be perceived in the world. You know, somebody's walking out of a conference room, they see a piece of paper on the floor and they pick it up and they throw it in the trash because they want the building to look nice. They're not accountable for doing that. The facilities janitorial staff is accountable for doing that, but they feel that they want to do things well. They help a team member with the PowerPoint presentation because they know how to do it and their team member is struggling. They feel that they want to be accountable for them. To help. They feel responsible to help. So what we need to do then inside our organization is help on the clarity side. What is it that we should be focusing on inside our organization to help them to be as successful as possible, and to be focused in on the right work? Because the question isn't whether or not people will feel accountable. The question is whether or not people will feel accountable for doing the right work. And that's what we need to focus on. So that's an organizational system, and that's something that we can do about it. That's something that we can do something about, and we can do it properly and really improve systems inside organization. So if we start with the manager, and that manager, let's look at one of the direct reports or subordinate roles that person has. There has to be delegation for them in order to help them understand what it is that they need to do to help the organization be successful, or in this case, to help manager Red ensure that the team is being as successful as possible in doing the work that they need to do. And there needs to be the feedback loop in terms of clarity of delegation. We use Elliott Jack's QQTR and talk about that in the book around what is the quality, what is the quantity, what is the timeliness, and what are the resources that you need to do the work and make sure that there's understanding. There's an extra part, and that is context and boundaries. So how do we make sure that we can help them understand what it is that they need to do in an ongoing way so they can make decisions that are consistent with the work that needs to happen. So at the end of the day, then, what we're really working at is trying to implement a system inside the organization, which we call the effective point of accountability. So how do we identify those points of accountability inside the organization that will help to ensure that people understand the work that they need to do? So how do we manage here? And then secondly, how do we collaborate here? These are the rules of the road for how we work together. Just as traffic would be gridlocked if we didn't have rules of the road for traffic, work gets gridlocked. People again end up creating churn if they don't have common rules of the road for how we work together inside the organization. So it's partly delegating down, and it's partly collaborating across the organization. So I want to take a quick pause here because this is the segue into function 3, which is ensuring work flows smoothly across the organization. Because Jacques, your question was, what about the role of the board and the role of the senior management team relative to the CEO's overall performance? So this has to do with accountability and authority. So certainly the board has a role. The board in an organization that has a board, the board really does need to also set context for the CEO, and as a whole is the delegates to the CEO in terms of what is the head of the organization accountable for achieving. Usually through the strategy and the budget are the two tools that they have to do that. But there are other policies that can be put in place by a board. And one of the questions that I believe boards should be asking of the CEO is whether they have an accountability and authority framework that is in place to ensure that people are clear about what they're accountable for and how they help to achieve the strategy. So that's an important part of the CEO's performance, is to have those kinds of tools in place and approaches in place to do that work. In terms of the senior management team, that's the feedback loop. So informally, the CEO should be having a very open feedback loop to learn from team members in terms of how they can work together better. And sometimes boards do put in 360 reviews of employees so that they get anonymous feedback on the CEO to help ensure that from their perspective, the team members feel appropriately treated and getting the right direction from the CEO. So let's move on to function 3, work through flows smoothly across the organization. Here we come to an issue that we have in many organizations. Most organizations have a scorecard system and a way of delegating work down the organization. The improvement there is, what are those single point of accountabilities for what someone is accountable for delegating, for doing and for achieving within their roles. When it comes to cross-functional work, what we find is that organizations typically do not do as good a job. So here, head of organization, red, is accountable for the whole organization. So let's imagine that they're delegating to a team member green there, is a CFO, and the head of the organization wants a new report on production and inventory levels because the board has been asking for that. Let's say it's a slightly larger organization. So typically what will happen is there's some back and forth with them. The CFO will go down to their team members. They'll pull together a draft. They'll go back to the CEO. So they work together over a week or 2 or 3, whatever it takes, to come up with that report that is important for them, and that will get the answer that they get the information that the CEO believes that he needs. So the question is, at what point does this person over here in production actually find out that they have to fill out this report? They usually find out when They usually find out when the person in finance sends an email to them and says, please fill out this report and get it back to me by Friday. So it's a surprise to them, and that's extra work that they didn't plan on doing. It's to them, it's not real work. They're kind of doing a favor for finance, and it creates the churn I've been talking about between finance and operations, around finance chasing the report, operations feeling they don't have time to do it or not doing it well or whatever. So the proper way to do it is, as you see here, is setting the context at the top. The head of the organization has that discussion with operations and with finance and says, I need this new report. How are we going to put it together? Let the two of them work it out. So you're setting this common context, and then they can delegate down their respective parts of the organization, so that by the time the report is ready to be done, the people that are actually going to be filling it out in operations understand this is work that's coming and the timelines to do it and so on. So it's a lot more complex, but if you don't take those steps up front, it ends up in additional churn inside the organization. And I've seen things go on for years where there's actual I want to use the word hatred, but antagonism at least built up between two departments because that context wasn't set clearly, and they see each other as antagonists instead of collaborators in terms of getting the work done. So what's really important then for cross-functional work is finding out where are those effective points of accountabilities inside the organization. So quickly, if we have this process here in Team Green, who would be the effective point of accountability for Team Green? It would be the head of Team Green, because that person, if there's a problem with the process, the manager of that team can decide to change the process and decide to have people work differently. Now, if we have two teams involved with the process, where is the effective point of accountability? Yeah, it can't be the head of Team Green. It can't be the head of Team Gold. I see people pointing up. Yes, it's 2 levels removed, because here, although I'd always say if there's a problem in the handoff between green and gold, you have to they have to try to work it out themselves. If they can't work it out themselves, they would escalate up to their managers, who would try to resolve it. But neither one has the authority to decide and to direct team members on the other side, on the other teams, to work differently. So it's only the dark green person here, next step up, that has that authority to decide and direct. And if we have a process that goes across the entire organization, it's the head of the organization is the effective point of accountability, because only they have the context and the oversight of the whole organization to understand what's best. So if there's a problem between a project team building something and maintenance receiving something, and the operations area receiving it and then starting to maintain it, if they can't agree on when the time is for the right handover, you need to have systems in place for figuring out how to do those. Sales and customer service, sales and production, you always have these little areas where there's a different perception about, what is the readiness, what is available, what is the response time, how do we support people in doing this. So the bottom line for you is, for cross-functional work, the effective point of accountability rests with the position that can decide and direct. And the biggest problem inside organizations is that often the person that has that effective point of accountability does not realize that they have it. So I will make these slides available to anyone. Actually, I'll send them out to all registrants, so you will get a copy of the slides, but I just put this one in to show the issues resolution. I call it continuous improvement for the effective point of accountability. So process anywhere in the organization between two teams don't work. They try to work it out. If they can't work it out, they escalate. Those two managers then try to work it out. If they can't work it out, they escalate, they try to work it out, and so on, until you find the effective point of accountability that can decide and that can direct. I have about 7 minutes left and 4 functions, so I'm going to go a couple of minutes over, but do feel free to continue to put questions in the chat if you have any, please. So the right organization design, this is one of the structural elements. And the biggest issue is that very often organizations are put in place organically. So if you think about organizations, they grow over time. And as a result of growing over time, they get more complex. When they first start out, the organization, I call this the kitchen table organization, the owner does everything. But when they're successful and they can't do all the work themselves, they have to start hiring people. So now the complexity has changed completely, because the owner of the organization now needs to not only do work, they also need to delegate works. They have to manage people, completely new skill set. And at the next level, they continue to grow. Now they've got too many workers to manage. They need to hire managers of workers. And now the owner needs to do their own work, but they also need to manage managers. So managing managers is more complex than managing workers. So how do owners do this? Can owners actually understand that the complexity of their work is changing and that they need to figure out how to delegate work in different ways so that they can continue to focus on their strategy and the long-term success of the company? At the next level up, this is where I first start usually seeing the CEO roles. We then have, now we have directors of functions and they're managing. So now it's the first time in the organization we have teams of teams. And this goes all the way up to 8 levels in organizations that are possible. So I won't dive into this. We could spend a whole hour just on this chart, but only to point out that organizations get more complex as they grow. Therefore, the owner has to think differently in terms of what kinds of systems need to be in place to ensure that they're delegating work correctly and understanding correctly what's happening at the front line, and to realize that each stage of growth, there are going to be conflict points because people will have to learn how to work differently. New kinds of systems will have to be put in place, and that creates issues for organizations if the owner doesn't anticipate that and have the right change management programs in place. So luckily in organization design, a Canadian, Elliot Jacks by name, I'll talk about him in a moment, came up with the scientific principles of organization design. And science is really important because science is about replicability and its consistency in how you can apply the approaches. So I always like, this is a picture of Newton, who came up with the theory of the law of universal gravitation is what he calls it. And he was in the 1600s sitting under an apple tree. Actually, they were having some kind of a pandemic then. That's why he was outside, but the apple fell. So that's not news since the beginning of time, since people could think. They knew if you held something in your hand and you dropped it, it would fall. But what he was able to do is understand the principles so he could come up with laws like the law of motion, the inertia force, the equal and opposite responses, which then advanced thinking, because applying these in different ways could lead to how do you apply these to planetary movement, for example. So it expands greatly. So I put in this picture of Elliot because he really was the founder of this and developing the principles of organization design. He's passed away, unfortunately, but he's left us a legacy of over 50 books where he documents all of his thinking, and hundreds, thousands now of PhD studies and other research studies that's reinforced this work. So the fundamental part of this work, the first part is around complexity of work. So that if you think of level 1 work in organizations, it's very declarative. People come in, they do their work, move up to the next level. Managers now are no longer following processes, they're creating processes, so they have to have a diagnostic capability. Directors have serial paths into the future. Vice presidents or owners at level 4 would have to build parallel paths into the future. So we talk about in the book a bit more about organization design and those various elements. But the key finding from Elliot is this increasing complexity, that it is scientific, and it can be measured in terms of how far into the future do people carry the can, he used to call it. So how far into the future do I have to deliver? So a frontline worker comes in the morning, is assigned the work and does the work, and then goes home at night. The vice president or a level 4 owner might be setting up a new market and want to start selling from Canada into the United States, and that might take 2 or 3 or 4 years, and they're accountable for doing that. So the complexity is much larger. Function 5, establish an effective talent management system. So here's the question for you. If the team manager role is vacant, who's usually hired to be the next team manager? Yes, I see you smiling. And everybody, I give this part of this presentation to CEOs across the country, and they always say, Germaine, thank you. Usually the best performer, so the best performer on the team. But if we think about what we just went on the last slide, if an individual is really, really good at doing that declarative work at level 1, and they're your best performer, and you promote them to level 2, if they don't have that capability at the next level to develop processes instead of following processes, to coach instead of do, then they're not going to be successful, and it is a significant problem. So capability, this is the second part of Elliott's discoveries, is that human capability is matched to different levels of complexity of work. So someone in level 1 work will do level 1 work. The second aspect of that, and I know this will get some reactions, the second aspect is that this is a maturation process. So some people work at level 1 very successfully and happily and well engaged and motivated their entire lives. Some people mature at some point into level 2 diagnostic capable work. Some go to level 3, some go to level 4. So understanding that and thinking about in your talent pool system, the ability of people to work at higher levels of complexity becomes really, really important. So talent pool system, always thinking about the roles then. What is the problem solving capability of that person? Elliott calls it mental processing capability. What are the skills and knowledge they need? What is the application? And once you know what the work is that needs to be done, then you start thinking about what is the individual capabilities and how do they match together. And it's that overlap that creates the fit to role in the organization. And having that kind of a process in place is really important for the organization, so that we really understand that as the organization grows and there's increasing complexity of work, that there's increasing capability of managers that is required as we go up the organization. So the final function number 6, establishing and managing appropriate support systems. This is my DALL-E image from today. Not the greatest, but I think it gets the point across. Artificial intelligence, I think we have to do a whole webinar just on that. We will soon. Establish and manage appropriate support systems. I have one main point for you to make. I've got 2 slides, but one main point to make, and that is that support systems carry out 2 fundamental purposes. The first one is to support the owner or the CEO to ensure that they have the right information and that the right systems are in place for effectiveness of work. So if we take finance as an example, as I show on this slide, finance then has this role. What are the reports we need? What are the financial statements we need, and so on, to ensure that the owner knows that we're on track, and to ensure that the board, if you have one, is getting the right information at the right time. The second part of support services work is providing support to managers. So what reports do they need? What information do they need? How can they help them make better decisions? This is cross-functional work that is supporting the organization. So it's really important that as the owner of the organization, you understand and differentiate these 2 types of work, one of which is direct output support to the head of the organization, and the other which is cross-functional support to support people in other parts of the organization. Because if we don't get that balance right, managers throughout the organization get the feeling that support services is more of a burden than a support. They're always asking me for reports. They're asking me for information. They're creating rules, which are, putting me in a straitjacket, rather than seeing support services as part of the organization that can help them to do better and help the organization overall to be more effective. So understanding that differentiation, teasing that apart, and making sure that the service levels that are available to managers throughout the organization are well understood becomes really, really important. Because if it's not, again, we're setting up those tensions between the owners of the organization, the owner of the organization. I'm sorry, they're setting up these conflicts between the support services parts of the organization and the operational parts of the organizations, because they don't agree on what the service level should be, when in fact it has to be set as context from the top of the organization. So it's all about work. How are we doing? We're went 3 minutes over. I wanted to be finished by the 45 minutes. I spoke faster than I probably should have, but I'm very delighted to have been able to share this with you. So I've just got a few slides in terms of additional resources that you can have available to you. But in closing, just to really reinforce that this is all about work and how work is done in organizations. So the starting point is always, what is the work? What is the work that we need to do? And then how do we find capable individuals to be assigned to do that work? And then how do we provide the appropriate managerial leadership so that they're fully engaged so that we can be as effective as we can be? So please turn your microphone on if you have a question, or drop it in the chat box if you would like. I'm very happy to answer that. In the slides that I send to you, or you can use your smartphone here, I have two versions of the book. The first one is the paperback edition. The second is the Kindle edition. Just to really stress, though, that this book is seen as a primer for the owner of the organization or the CEO. We don't give them the tools here. I'm working on my third book now, which is going to be kind of the opus in terms of the how-tos. But this is really to give insights at a high level to the owners of the organization of what's going on. So it's an easy read. It's something that people can take away and get that overall insight of where their focuses need to be. So back to questions or comments. Hi, Fred. I saw you joined us just after we got started. Welcome. Oh, and Tuya,
good to
I see you're on
see you
camera
again.
as well. Nice to see you, Fred. Thank you for joining us. And Tuya from Mongolia. Oh, I see you've got your grandson with you. And Marvin from the Caribbean. I see you don't have a camera on, but nice for you to join us, Marvin. Oh, and Jerry, welcome. So any questions?
Not a question, Dwight, but a comment. When you talk about accountability and having to go up a level to establish who's accountable, the points of accountability, I think culture has a lot to do with how well that works or does not work. Because the companies I've worked with, leadership and culture are a big factor in everybody's performance. So if you're into a culture where teamwork, and I've been in a culture where teamwork is seen as a weakness, when you go across to another organization, the other part of the organization, and ask for help or ask for anything, they might ignore you, or they say, "Oh no, I don't have time." So culture is a big factor, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's 1,000%, Jermaine, and that's reflected by the comments I made around values in the organization and the culture of the organization. So it's a very powerful tool that owners can use to drive performance. I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think culture is co-created. So as you said at the beginning, culture is kind of an output, as you said. I never used it that way, but culture is certainly co-created. So executives have a big role, but everybody in the organization has a role to make the company work and to get the work done. So they have a role into play. Do they really live the values that they should, and are engaged enough to get the work done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree very much. I'm just getting a question from Jacques here about whether the paperback is available from Amazon. It is, in fact, that's the only channel that I'm using for the sale of the book is Amazon, just because it's so darn easy. Even though you don't really make money on it, but this is not really about making money. So this QR code will take you to that page on the Amazon website, and is available in different currencies depending where you order it from.
I'm wondering, what have you found as kind of the most effective starting place for introducing this to an organization?
What I like to do with, as in most consulting projects, is a two-part. So the first part is always an assessment. So really get a good, clear picture of what's happening inside the organization. And one part of that can be done with assessing. We're working now on, I hope they'll have a launch for that at some point, on an automated system where owners can measure the employee engagement, the managerial leadership practices, the support services aspect of it, and also what the key factors are that need for improvement in terms of manager effectiveness. So to have that kind of information becomes really important. And then this, and from my perspective, it really does need to start with the head of the organization, because you can have some impact in larger organizations. If you work with the VP, for example, of a department, you can have some impact, but these things are much better done organization-wide. The other part of the assessment, Fred, so we have the survey, then it's the organization design assessment, because I find that in almost all organizations, you have extra layers where you don't really need them, and you have missing layers where you really should have them. So by understanding these principles, the owner can build an organization design that is more reflective of what their needs are and can really help to support strategy in a more powerful way.
Yeah, it just seems with any kind of change within the organization that what you're talking about needs to be done first, because otherwise you're introducing a process into a dysfunctional kind of structure that you don't fix that structure first, and then there's continuing problems.
Okay, yes, thank you. Yeah, I was thinking, answering your question from the perspective of where do I start, like with whom do I start? But it's with which system do you start? Yeah, so I agree. It's the fundamentals, the organization design and accountability and authority.
Yeah, related to that, Fred, because I was thinking about change too. People who are responsible for leading change across an organization outside of their own department or their own group, they can benefit from a lot of the things that Dwight has pointed out here in terms of helping them understand that they're accountable. Because I worked with clients who have a really rough time getting through to other departments or other countries if they have a global role, and understanding accountability and helping them understand that too really helps. I also help them establish relationships. That's a big factor as well.
Yeah. We're fortunate to have George Weber with us. George, I supported George when he was the CEO of the Royal Ottawa Healthcare Group, and we did this work there in the way that we've just been talking about. And coming out of it, because George is George, there were really good records and statistics around what was happening with Dr. Prince, who was their head of strategy. We were able to track over 3 years the change from the implementation of proper organization design, accountability, and authority managerial leadership, and the change with outputs over those 3 years, and that got published in the Canadian Health Journal. So thank you for that, George. That helped to to advance the work. Sorry, Fred, did I cut you off there?
Oh, I was just going to say I've got a friend that used to be a head of the learning organization for Mitsubishi in Japan, and they had operations in China, and they had a cross-cultural mess just trying to operate across that board because of the kind of the tumultuous history of the two countries.
Yes. Yeah. Culture plays a big role in that, so that it creates a bigger challenge for the head of that organization, for sure. But again, it reinforces that the role of the head of the organization between those two divisions has to have a role in doing that. Otherwise, just leaving to the two of them to try to work it out is not going to be successful. Okay, that brings us to the top of the hour. I really do want to thank everyone for joining today. Thank you. And if you have any questions come up, let me know. I'll be sending you an email later today with a copy of the slides. And if there are any questions that you want to follow up with me by email, please feel free to do that.
Thank you, Dwight. Well done.
Have a great day, everyone.